longitudinal across Australia, and the other is looking at the network and its evolution. Who knows when the first community garden, the first documented community garden started?
1970s?
Yeah! I say documented because occasionally I've run into people who said, oh, and this happened in Sydney with the first community garden, oh, there's a community garden before that. But there might well have been, but it's lost to history because nobody documented it.
And it's not still going now.
And it's not still going. So the first documented one we have was there. So if you guys, upside down, 1977 at Nunawading, which is apparently a suburb of Melbourne. And so Nunawading community gardening is regarded as the first. It's still going. It has moved from where it was quite some time ago, so I understand. But that's where it all sort of started happening. And it's interesting too, who was saying, James, talking about permaculture. 1977 was when the first permaculture book, Permaculture 1, was published. There was no connection.
Interesting.
But it's interesting, and that might say something about the times. Yeah, the 70s, you know. Okay, move on a bit to 79,
Good year,
and we get Collingwood Children's Farm. Has anybody been there?
Yes.
Yeah, if you haven't, it's one of two things you need to do in Melbourne. One's go to Ceres and put at least a whole afternoon to that.
Absolutely.
And the rest of the day, or the next afternoon, put it into Collingwood Children's Farm. It's on a bend in the Yarra. There's a farmer's market there on the weekend. And they've got sort of big farm animals like pigs and a cow. So it's actually more in that UK tradition of a city farm.
Is it only for children?
No, don't know what. I think that's probably a historical artefact.
They don't produce children,
It
though.
started,
They don't produce.
it started as an educational program for kids to learn about farming. So that's the history of children's farms.
Fantastic.
It just reminds me of that old Yes Minister episode. They wanted to set up a city farm. Did anyone see that? No. It's really funny. It always is, isn't it?
Well, yeah, you're a bit.
That'd be one.
You there with us?
Well, after, this kind of.
So the decade flips and we're in Melbourne still in 82 and we get the start of Ceres. Ceres is in East Brunswick and it's...
Can I make a suggestion? If you aim that way, you might get Neil
Yeah,
in your
okay.
voice as well.
It's, sorry, what was it? Ceres is a very big place built on an old landfill. It's council land. It's on Mary Creek. And it's quite an enterprise. It's grown from when I first saw it in 1984 when I went there with a woman from Sydney called Robin Francis, and we went out to have a look at what's happening there. It was sort of two sheds in this sort of weedy field with a chook run and some community gardens. But
Wow.
it's big now. It's big. They employ people. They do labour market programs. Up Mary Creek, they got 2 hectares of commercial market garden which they sell at the Ceres fresh food markets. They run a community supported agriculture called Ceres Good Food, which delivers weekly boxes of food to subscribers on that community supported agriculture model. They do training, their schools program, they've got a childcare centre and a railway carriage on there. There's so much there, you've got to go and see it anyway.
Huge amount of things.
And Jane, you might want to step in here because we come to Sydney and Sydney's first community garden.
Garden, yay!
Congratulations.
We're turning 30 in October.
Having a party?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
We all come.
So it's on
Everyone's
Health Department land, and it's I don't know how big it is.
I don't know,
It's
I
big
don't
for
think
Sydney.
it's
Sydney's
smaller than
gardens are
this.
small. We don't have all this space.
No, way smaller than this.
But it's a good little place just down on an inlet from Sydney Harbour, next to a football field. And it's been used for educational purposes and all sorts of things.
I'd say it's about 2 tennis courts. Would you?
Yeah.
What suburb are you in?
In
Right.
Lilyfield, Leichhardt's probably better known.
Yeah. It's as I said, it's on Health Department land, and it's on land which is they recently been looking at reusing. It's an old mental hospital, and it's still going. I was on the master planning team for the Cullen Parkland site, so we put in there to retain the community garden And I think I got it through with that, and give it land to expand if it wants it.
The community was really supportive when we went through that process of consulting. There was a big community consultation about Callum Park, and which is what, 60 hectares or something?
Yeah, it's huge.
And everyone's been battling to keep it open space. Friends of Callum Park have done this fabulous job saving it year after year from developers and stuff. And yeah, when we went to those community meetings and we said, look, we'd like to expand a little bit, and everybody else from outside the garden said, no, why don't you expand over here? There's plenty of room. You expand more. And we're going, oh, okay then. So yeah, there was a lot of community support. It hasn't happened yet, but there was community support.
Mm-hmm. So that is the start of it. The next garden was actually at in 1991 in if anybody knows Newtown, urban Newtown. It's just, yeah, okay. It's a bit like Brunswick Street in Melbourne, if anybody's been there. But there's education department land and Angel Street, they call themselves Angel Street Permaculture Forest or something now. It used to be
Permaculture Food Forest.
Yeah, okay. They approached the school. What had happened, they'd been looking for to start a Sydney farm, and there's been 4 attempts at that. And so they, the South Sydney Council, which has long ago disappeared, said no. So a couple walking home one day saw this land, and they said, hey, we could start something small here, like a community garden. Who owns the land? They looked it up, Education Department, trotted up to see the head teacher of the high school there, and they said, can we access this disused block of land, which is down below you? And the head teacher said, what land? They didn't know they actually owned it. So anyway, they went there, and it's still there. It's in urban Newtown. So it's a big skip across the water now, across the desert, to 95, to Perth City Farm. Another magnificent.
Sorry, where did Angel Street go?
Oh, I haven't got an Angel Street. 1991. Perth is one of these things, it's a bit like a replication of Ceres on a smaller scale. It's one of these grand things. This is the grand period of city farm creation here.
But originally this was a Men of the Trees program and a youth program. They were looking for a disused site, so they found an old industrial site.
And once again, if you go to Perth, go there. It's not far from the city. Lots to see. They've got a farmers market on a Saturday, I think. You right there now?
I am.
Not falling off
Are
your
you
seat?
having morning tea without us?
Oh,
Nell.
look at this. Oh, hello.
Can she hear us?
Nell, you're having morning tea without us?
She forgot she's on video.
So Perth City Farm, it's still run by Men of the Trees?
No.
Yes.
It's an incorporated association. They've just started that up about a year or 2 years ago.
Actually, it still comes under the Men of the Trees.
Right.
Tom Scott is president of the Men of the Trees, and they've put
that's right. You're
and
right.
City
WA.
Farms under Men of the Trees.
97.
And the interesting thing about it was a contaminated industrial
Yeah.
site, and they've converted into something productive.
Because there was a woman from Perth from the City Farm came to Sydney a few years ago, and they were going through an incorporation to change the name and
Oh yeah,
make it
they
into
are
another-
separately incorporated, but it still comes under Men of the Trees.
Oh, okay. Oh, good.
Fiona, have you got another ticket so we can put it
So
in?
you know Tom Scott.
Another sticker?
Fiona, you
Yeah,
know Tom.
they're putting those in.
Oh, okay.
That's the next phase. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Something different happened in 1998 in Melbourne. Cultivating community started.
Too early.
We're doing that.
Cultivating community isn't actually a community garden or a city farm. It's a community association, an organisation. And they contracted to the Department of Human Services and the state government to provide community garden, community food systems services to social housing tenants. And that's their main focus. They also have a schools program. In fact, they trialled a schools program in the inner city with a well-known schools, a woman who's well known for a school sort of program, a cook, a chef. And anyway, so what they do, they're a service provider to state government, and they look after something like 24 or so community gardens. They started a community kitchen on the Fitzroy housing estate, which you can see. It's a big brick structure where all these Turkish women apparently turn up each week and loaded up with about 30 loaves of bread or whatever it is to make. So it's a community kitchen, which is part of the food security sort of program. They've been very much, as I said, involved in developing school programs. They employ people, full and part-time. mostly people who can go out and teach horticulture to people who knew nothing about it, including those who speak, multiple languages, different languages. So it can be quite a challenging job. But that's an interesting sort of model. 2005, in South Australia, Claire Fulton, or Claire Nettle, she is now. You guys must know her.
Yep.
She was doing her PhD and was very much involved in the community garden network then, and helping set up community gardens, but mostly providing really invaluable research. And her PhD is actually published as a book, a hardcover book. But she was involved in producing a community garden resource kit, and later on publishing with, is it a neighbourhoods housing association or something like that? One of those agencies producing a start-up kit which you can download from the community.
Yeah, it was actually launched here at Fern Avenue with the minister.
Oh, okay.
About 206.
And that's the 2010, that's the gardening, the growing community start-up kit. So that's one of those valuable documents. Nearly through.
They're not us. Not us. These two are not the network. These are other things.
Yeah, okay. Fiona's organised all this, you can see. But yeah, I didn't get a briefing. Okay.
This is Nell. To get Nell involved in this one.
Nell, what happened in 2010 in Tassie?
Oh, was that the year that we had the conference?
Yes.
State conference?
conference.
Yep. At Devonport.
In Devonport.
Devonport Community
And
Garden.
that was the year that we had the Eat Well, Grow Well program. And so that was a state government funded, maybe it was a nationally funded project in Tasmania, just looking at community gardens. And I was with Eat Well Tasmania. And so part of that project was to collate what was happening around community gardens, and then we had a gathering in Devonport, and I think Fiona and Russ were there.
Yeah, it was a
We
great.
had about 120 people there.
Yeah, it was a great event.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Nell. Then in 2010, an eventful year, there's a community garden conference in Canberra called by the agency which runs, it's a community association which sort of runs and assists community gardens. They have about 12, called COGS, what is it? Canberra Organic Growing Society, yeah. And they worked with the University of Canberra on a research project. So they had a conference down there at the university in 2010. And I think Costa might have mentioned that when he said something about Canberra
Yeah,
before.
Costa was there, I was there.
Yeah, and it was a really good sort of conference. Yeah, people presented research papers and stuff, and generally met up and had a talk. And Christine Milne from the Greens Party was there and offered advice on how to influence politicians and all that sort of stuff. So it was quite helpful. Okay, so Fiona, shall I go on with these?
So that was mapping, just briefly, how community gardens evolved, and all you guys are going to fill in the gaps that you know of in a minute. But Russ is now going to go through how the network itself, the Australian City Farms and Community Gardens Network, got going.
As I was saying before, you can see that the great era of city farm creation was up here. There's a couple more which have been created. The City of Sydney's been looking at setting one up, but that's a different process. That's more of a top-down process. And Hobart is well underway to a community-developed city farm. They've got a site. I don't know if they're doing any works on there at the moment, but it's in
I think
planning.
I open it in May.
I have seen them
Yeah,
working.
yeah, they're working, they're doing a lot.
Costa's going to be opening it on Saturday the 2nd of May.
So Hannah Maloney, who's a permaculture educator there, and she's been very much involved in it, as well as having a child and a husband. She decided to start a city farm as well as run her courses. So the network, okay. In 1995, a few of us who in Sydney who had been involved in or had some association with the early gardens, say like the 1991 garden in Newtown, Glover Street community garden, or Glover Street permaculture, Forestville, whatever
It's just usually just called Glover's Garden.
Yeah,
Actually.
they keep the third iteration. I gave up. It's like tracking government agencies. Every couple of years they change their name, and you find yourself using a name for 10 years ago. But so we thought, oh, we need to get people together and so we can meet each other and talk about what our needs are. So we organised a Saturday gathering at Randwick Community Garden at Randwick Community Centre, and we thought we'd get, if we're lucky, we'll get 10, maybe 12 people coming, and we thought that'd be really optimistic. We ended up getting 35 to 40. We don't know where they came from, but we realised something's going on here. We actually don't know what it is, and we need to explore it more. One missed call.
That'll be the phone, Nell.
So we called this meeting and we got the surprise result. And there's a guy there who's from the, one of the universities in Canberra, I think ANU, who was doing his PhD, and he was doing it in community enterprise. And he was looking at self-help, employment creation, community gardens, all of those sort of things. And after it he said, look, I've been going around to all these community gardens, and there's a few out there, but none of them know each other exist. So they're solving the same old problem time after time. And what we need is a means to share what we know and to help each other. He said, we need to create a community gardens network, and it needs to be national. And his name was Darren Phillips, and last I heard, he was practicing plant pathology in Hobart. So he started it off. So he asked a few people around the country, will you be contacts? He asked myself and Fiona, will we New South Wales contacts? Murad Gamble from Senior National, who was living in Brisbane. She's now at Crystal Waters Village, but she became a contact. There's somebody in Melbourne at Ceres. There's a guy in South Australia at some place called Salisbury, who was a school teacher. And that was it, I think, to start. So we thought, well, what do we do? Thank you. What do we do? Okay, we'll create this network. Now, how do we start talking? So, as you know, the first thing you do when you want to find what's going on, you go and do a reconnaissance. What's out there? What's happening? What does it look like? What does it do? And who's involved? So we did our own, and in 1996 published the first edition of the Community Gardens Inventory. And, on paper, yes. These things are now digital. They're called databases. By the time it was finished and when it was published, Darren published this, we were still getting people saying, hey, we've got a garden too, So all these latecomers, so another edition had to come out the next year to update it. And I think there's something like 60 or 70, can count if they want, 60 or 70 community gardens in here. I'll pass this around. But you can see what was happening at that time in the mid-90s.
Russ, don't pass it around at the moment because of time. Just pop it on the floor.
Russ, do all of those gardens still exist today?
I doubt it.
It's got to get organised. And this one goes on before it. This is when it was established.
This is what it's like having a personal assistant. But they organise you, and you never know where you're going to be. Where's the next meeting? Oh, in Melbourne. Okay, but we're in Perth.
Well, Darren had a really good idea. I'm glad he did.
Well, it was timely, History throws up, time throws up things that emerge out of them, and there was a bit of stuff on the ground, and the Community Garden Network sort of emerged out of it. And our initial thing was just to make contact with people and find out who's out there, and to start people talking. Problem is, of course, this was before everybody was connected up. It's only, a couple of years after the first usable website browser, Mosaic browser, was launched, which is about 94, 95. So a lot of people were not connected, so we had to use paper. And I think Costa said that too about communication. People used to use telephones, what we now call voicemail. And all those sort of things, and meeting up physically. So things were challenging
I remember
then.
when Costa was saying that, Marag and I, we were quite active in Queensland and Sydney at that time, and we were having phone calls. We'd start at 11 o'clock and finish about 2 o'clock from Brisbane to Sydney. So it was all done by phone.
It was on the STD. Do they still have the STD network, or has that been long ago replaced? 2003, 2004, we decided, well, let's put it this way. In the life of organisations, there's times when the whole thing needs reiteration, rethinking, restructuring and redoing. That came in 2004. It had been a bit quiet. And people like Ben Neal, who came out of, he used to be the CEO of Cultivating Communities in Melbourne, the association contractor to the Department of Human Services. He was one of these young guys who could make things happen. And he was incredibly personable. He could get on with anybody, even if he had enemies, which he wouldn't have. He would have got on quite well with them. But he made things happen, but in a quiet way. He had no showmanship. He just did it. And he and a crew decided it's time to relook at the network. So they had a national conference in Bendigo. Now, I recall it was winter. I don't know if anybody's been to Bendigo in winter. The skies were sort of permanently grey, it was cold, yeah, all of that. But it was worthwhile, and out of that, I guess the network was revived, or was reiterated into a new sort of iteration.
And can I say also at that 2004 one, there'd been calls for someone or a group of people to facilitate that conference. And no one put their hand up. So when we got there, it was like, okay, what do we do now? Yeah. So it was a little bit frantic, and some people, because it wasn't organised, got a bit anxious about it. But in the end, it was the start of the process of who is the network now, and where do we want the network to go. And there was 100-odd people there, and we were in a Scouts hall. Does anyone else there? Were you guys there?
Yeah, but I love the concept.
And so we had a couple of days just getting to know each other, getting to know what our hopes and dreams were, to work out what the next steps were. So it was actually pretty chaotic, but lots of fun, and lots of great friendships made that are still there today.
It's actually a good way to run a conference. Come out with how here's a generality of what we want to do. How we do it, we'll figure it out later at the time. We'll make it up. Making up things at the time is how a lot of businesses work. It's how government works, but it's how community organisations can work too.
It's called adaptive management.
So it's a jargon word for it. Thank you. I'll remember that.
Yeah, cool. Yay.
So Coolum on the Sunshine Coast was the next one.
Anyone there?
Yay! I brought the t-shirt with me. I'll wear it tomorrow. Yay!
We didn't get t-shirts made up.
Oh.
It's not too late.
So at Coolum, what came out of that was the first of the Community Garden Awards. And these weren't sort of tap the back good things, they were advocacy tools. So in Tasmania, in Launceston, there was a community garden at Ravenswood. And has anybody been there? Anybody been to Punchbowl Community Garden? Go there. It is huge.
Nell has.
Nell has. Am I right?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, in a very low socio-economic area, so it's been doing great things for decades.
And Punchbowl's in a big council gave most of their depot to it. You said one of the streets their depot, and it's in a big sort of parkland. It's like you've got those bushland. It's like putting a big community garden in there.
Perfect.
Yeah. So out of that, we Ravenswood were looking at the thing. Thought we're going to lose their land in Launceston. So at the Coolum conference, Ben Neal and others decided we should do something, so we invented the awards, gave them an award, put some publicity out about it, then Ben went down to Launceston to physically, in a ceremony, hand them the award, and the garden stayed. So we realised that you can do advocacy in many different ways, and that was one. 2006, went to a place called Adelaide.
Milo. Milo. It was?
Milo?
The town was Milo.
Oh, okay.
We've got a bit of paper that goes with it.
Yeah. And I was going to say, does anybody want to say anything about it? Who might have been there?
It was great. Claire's food was amazing as well. She's a multi-talented person.
She cooked it.
She was catering as well as doing all sorts of stuff.
She was also exhausted.
Mm.
So that was called Putting Down Roots. And out of that, there's a lot of stuff called Learning in the Garden. Did you want to say something about that?
This is the first time the network was starting to organise school garden conferences alongside community garden conferences, so they went hand in hand. There is another school garden conference up in the top row, but I can't remember what year that was, that Cultivating Community
About
was
2004
organised.
or so.
But this is the first time the network started doing them.
There was, the school gardening sort of movement was getting underway then, and they were asked, do you want to set up your own network? And they said, oh no, we'll hang off the Community Gardens network and utilise its website. They weren't ready to set up an association, and that's never really happened, has it?
And the other thing with this conference was the Seed Savers were having annual network meetings as well, and we thought, why don't we bung them all in together, and everyone can come in together and we'll just add another day. So that we went into partnership with the Seed Savers Network that year.
Do people know Seed Savers Network? Yeah. So something else happened quite similar in Melbourne in 2007. Now, up to date, most of these conferences had been internal things focused on the network itself and its own evolution. In 2007, they took a step out to a big public event. Once again, you can blame Ben Neal and his crew in Melbourne. That was a 5-day event. There's, I think, 2 or 3 days of community garden conference, a day for the Seed Savers Network. Once again, they were having their annual conference, and school garden events a day, and tours. So it was a big event, and it filled Collingwood Town Hall.
And a harvest festival at Ceres.
Followed by the harvest festival at Ceres. So that was about 350 people all up in that hall, and it was a major thing, and they made some money from that.
And that's how we've survived from then till now.
And through John's management.
Yes.
John's one of those people who could tote up a column of numbers, okay, so that's the basis of that. So there's some of the sort of key events in the evolution of the network. Just going through Fiona's, okay. 2012. See, I can't write clearly. I was never trained as a teacher.
I'm wearing the t-shirt.
So in 2012, there's the Sydney conference at the Randwick Community Centre, which is where the permaculture interpretive garden and other stuff that Fiona's built there, and the new outdoor classroom for the council's school education science program for pre and primary kids has been built. So that is a sort of a good get together. I don't know how many of them. I'm trying to think of roughly.
There's 115 all up, but about 80 each day.
So that was a good conference. And here I've got Ecotopia, Heaven and Earth, but there's no date. That came out of that.
That was it.
That was it.
Same. So that went with that. Yeah. So they piggybacked on.
Ecotopia was a writers' festival, which happened
Ecotopia was out.
Oh, sorry, Ecotopia. What am I thinking? Heaven and Earth.
Ecotopia was
Festival.
us.
Heaven and Earth is a writers' festival focused on gardens and nature. And that sort of happened just after ours.
Russ, can we take a break there while I change tape? Sorry, mate.